Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to John. Glory to you, Lord Christ. Very truly I tell you, anyone who does not enter the sheepfold by the gate, but climbs in by another way, is a thief and a bandit. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought all of his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. They will not follow a stranger, but they will run from him because they do not know the voice of strangers. Jesus used this figure of speech with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So again, Jesus said to them, "Very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and bandits, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved and will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand, who is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and runs away. And the wolf snatches them and scatters them. The hired hand runs away because a hired hand does not care for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own and my own know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. And I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that do not belong to this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock, one shepherd. For this reason, the Father loves me, because I lay down my life in order to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it up again. I have received this command from my Father." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Christ.
Good morning. Good morning, St. Peter's. So this is the fourth Sunday after Easter, which is often called Good Shepherd Sunday. And it's called Good Shepherd Sunday because every year we read Psalm 23, or we read part of John 10. And even today, the second reading had a reference to sheep and shepherds in it. So this Sunday, it's all sheep all the time. And I want to begin with a little story about sheep. I didn't grow up raising sheep, but about almost 20 years ago, my wife Julia and I moved to Scotland so that I could do a PhD program. And when we moved to Scotland, we had different fantasies, I guess, about what our life was going to be like. For me, I imagined heated theological debates that spilled over into late night discussions in a pub. But Julia was looking forward to learning about Scottish woolcraft, like things like spinning and knitting and weaving. So to split the difference between our two fantasies, on the weekdays, I'd spend my time in the library or the seminar room. And on the weekends, we'd rent a car or maybe board a train in search of sheep. And on one such trip, we headed south from Glasgow, where we were living, to check out Hadrian's Wall for me, and to look for sheep for Julia. So Hadrian's Wall is this squat stone wall, only a couple of feet high, but it stretches nearly 80 miles from coast to coast, from one coast to the other in England. It was constructed in AD 122 under the orders of Emperor Hadrian in order to create a boundary between the northern end of the Roman Empire and the barbarians further north. If you're a Game of Thrones fan, it's sort of like a really tiny, stony version of the wall in the north of the Game of Thrones universe. So we decided to pull over at a convenient spot and take a closer look at the wall. And the portion of the wall that we were exploring had also been repurposed by a farmer to serve as one of the sides of a large sheep enclosure. And not unlike the thief and the bandit in Jesus's parable this morning, we were sneaking into the sheepfold, and we were definitely not using the gate. And so while I was trying to imagine what this place would have looked like in Roman Britain, Julia was trying to make friends with the sheep. But no matter how lovingly she called, and that's Julia calling the sheep, saying probably, "Here, sheepy, sheepy," the flock remained aloof, and they just wouldn't follow her voice. That is, until almost as of one mind, the sheep turned and started charging up the hill at Julia and me. And she was really demonstrating the difference between leading sheep and being chased by sheep at that moment. And so with me, we sheltered in the remains of Hadrian's wall for a little while until the sheep were distracted by something and went on to do their sheep business. So in spite of our best intentions, we were clearly not good shepherds in that moment. So today, I'd like to spend a little time unpacking this parable of the Good Shepherd, the parable that Jesus is sharing with us this morning. And to understand the parable of the Good Shepherd, what we really need to do is put it in context within the Gospel of John. So the parable of the Good Shepherd is in John 10, and it's really a response to this controversy that erupts in John 9 around the healing of the man born blind. Now, you may remember this story, this particular healing. It's the one where Jesus spits on the ground, makes a kind of mud mask with his saliva. I think you can get these at Sephora. And he places it on the eyes of the blind man and commands the man to wash in the pool of Siloam. The healing raises the ire of the Pharisees and really all the people around him. The Pharisees in particular are upset because Jesus is healing on the Sabbath, and this healing that he does supports the claims that Jesus is making and that his followers are making about who Jesus is, his identity. In John's gospel, when Jesus performs a miracle like the healing of the man born blind, it's often referred to by John as a sign. Such signs, they point to the identity of Jesus. They demonstrate in action who Jesus is, that he really is who he says that he is. And namely, the identity of Jesus in the Gospel of John is the one who's sent by God to be with God's people. He's the one who leads them into abundant life, and he's the one who protects them with his self-sacrificial love. Now, as with any sign, in order to read it or to make it out, you need to be able to see clearly. And the Pharisees and the many who were upset by the healing of the blind man, they couldn't believe that such a healing could occur in the first place. And they doubted that God would empower such a healing on the Sabbath when healings were forbidden. And they were incredulous about Jesus being the one who was doing the healing. In other words, giving physical sight to a blind man pointed to the spiritual blindness of the professionally religious in Jesus's day. They couldn't see who Jesus really was. So to offer spiritual sight to the spiritually blind, kind of a spiritual equivalent of the physical healing in John 9, in John 10, Jesus paints a kind of word picture with this parable. And the picture illustrates three different aspects of Jesus's identity. And these things are that Jesus is the shepherd whose voice is known, that Jesus is the gate to abundant life, and that Jesus is the sacrificial shepherd. So first, the shepherd whose voice is known. When Julia and I were visiting this field in the north of England, at the border between England and Scotland, we clambered over the wall and we didn't enter by the gate. and those sheep clearly did not recognize our voices. But over the years, we would visit other sheepfolds, many different sheepfolds, in search of wool and in the experience of getting to know sheep. And we were able to witness firsthand what a healthy relationship between sheep and a shepherd looks like. The shepherds who were most recognized by their sheep, that is, the shepherds whose sheep heard their voice or knew their voice, they were the shepherds who spent the most time with their sheep. So the difference between the thief and the bandit on the one hand, and the shepherd on the other, it's not just their intentions towards the sheep, but it's their commitment to abiding with the sheep over the long haul, to being with the sheep for the long haul. So with this parable, Jesus is saying to his disciples, you can trust that I'm the one sent by God because I'm the one who's with you, and I will remain with you always. I'm not some fly-by-night Messiah or some armchair general or some bandit king. I'm here, and I'm here to stay. So this first image from the parable of the Good Shepherd is that Jesus is the one sent by God to be with God's people forever. So as we move forward in the text, it's clear in verse 6 that those around Jesus couldn't quite make out what it was that he was trying to say with his parable. So Jesus goes on to expand what he means by referring to himself as the gate. Now, to be honest, this particular metaphor has not always been used well by Christian communities. Sometimes we hear preachers try to describe Jesus as the gate who's trying to keep people out of the church, or maybe trying to keep people in the church safe from those who are on the outside, from those thieves and bandits who are on the other side of the gate. But that's not at all what Jesus is saying. Jesus isn't the gate that keeps people penned in. Rather, he's the gate that leads us out into freedom. Jesus says, whoever enters by me will be saved and will come in and go out and find pasture. Rather than keeping people out of the sheep pen, he is the way that God's people journey into green pastures and still waters. So in the second image from the parable of the Good Shepherd, we see that Jesus is the gate that leads God's people into abundant life. So finally, Jesus concludes his three-part parable about sheep and gates and shepherds by calling himself the Good Shepherd. That's where we get the name for Good Shepherd Sunday. He's the Good Shepherd, the one who lays down his life for his sheep. Now, when Julia and I would drive through the Scottish countryside, we would joke that they don't have traffic jams in rural Scotland. They have sheepy jams. Aimless sheep would make their way across the road and sometimes choose to plop down in the middle of pavements, endangering themselves and enraging tourists like us who are on our way to other destinations. A neglectful shepherd would leave their sheep on the road, putting the sheep and the surprised or maybe angered tourist at risk. But a good shepherd rescues their flock, even if doing so puts the shepherd's life on the line. So when Jesus calls himself the shepherd who lays down his life for the sheep, the picture that he paints is one that points, kind of like a sign, to his own death on the cross. The cross for Jesus is the ultimate symbol of self-sacrificial love. It demonstrates that there's no limit to his love for his sheep and that not even death can separate them from his care. So in closing, the parable of the Good Shepherd helps us to see that Jesus is the one who's been sent by God to be with God's people, to lead us into abundant life, and to protect us with his self-sacrificial love. It's a message that I really need to hear on this, the 8th Sunday of what I like to call COVID tide. As I think about the word picture that Jesus has painted, which helps to give sight to those who are spiritually blind, I see in his words a promise that I can hold on to and a pattern that I can live by as I navigate these uncertain days. The promise that Jesus offers us is that he's our good shepherd and that he's with us no matter what. Even though we're socially isolated, separated from those we love, and we may be experiencing anxiety, depression, or loneliness, Jesus promises us that we're not alone. And not only is Jesus with us, but we're part of this larger flock called the church. And we may be a dispersed family that's physically distanced, but we're still part of that one body that stretches through time and space and eternity. In other words, Jesus' promise to us is that we're not alone, even in a time of pandemic. The second thing that I take away from this parable is a pattern that I want to live by. I tell my theology students that whenever we talk about God or say something about God, we're also saying something about what we hope for humanity. It's not because God is a projection of humanity, but because as humans, we're made in God's image, and we are reflections of God's character. And Jesus, who is the fully human and fully divine one, is not only the clearest image of God, but also the clearest example of what it means for humans to be fully alive. So if the Good Shepherd is one who is known by his people and present to them and leads them through self-sacrificial love, we can see in this image a pattern for how we too can live our lives. And I see examples of this all over the place when I look at this church. Every time we reach out to a friend for a Zoom happy hour or a quick check-in, we are being present to them just like Jesus is present to us. Every time we offer help or hope to our children or our neighbors or our spouses, it's like we're opening gateways into the abundant life that God has promised to us. And every essential worker who risks their well-being for their fellow human, they're laying down their life for another. And even those of us who are sheltering at home and who forego public gatherings or recreation, we too are sacrificing something, sacrificing a part of our own life for the good of others. In all of these sacrifices, big and small, we're following in the pattern of our Good Shepherd, the shepherd who laid down his life for his sheep. And so, my socially isolated brothers and sisters, may we continually be drawn into the care and example of Jesus Christ, our Good Shepherd. And may we hold on to his promise of presence and live into his pattern of love. Amen.